would just say to you all, thank you all for coming out. And no matter what happens, good luck to both candidates. I don't envy them. I've been in their spot before, so you all have put your best foot forward. Thank you all for your service to the 5th Ward, and let's get started with the forum. We have on, well, to my left, Ms. Martina Home, and to my far left, Mr. Desmon Yancy. These are the runoff candidates for the 5th Ward Aldermanic seat. We're going to allow the candidates 2 minutes each to give an opening statement. And our timekeeper sitting in the front here, she is very capable. So keep your eyes on her at some point. She will signal you in about 30 seconds.
1 minute and 30 seconds.
1 minute and 30 seconds. And please remember to abide by your time. And please be civil to one another. If something should occur where the civility is tested, I will step in. But other than that, please, let's get this started. So, Ms. Holmes, we'll start with you.
Okay, they were making us multitask by holding these microphones. I'm Tina Dunn, a resident of the 5th Ward, born in Hyde Park, but raised in Roseland. Went to UC and came back to Hyde Park about 7 years ago. I spent the bulk of my career in Washington, D.C., working on a range of civil rights and social justice issues. I'm a lawyer by training, and I became a lawyer because I'm biracial, and I have an African-American mother and a father from the former Yugoslavia. I saw the stark differences in their worlds growing up, and I wanted to make those differences go away. I used to tell my mother, you know, Mom, you ain't making it up. It is harder for Black people. Because I was seeing how people were living on the north side. I was seeing how the other side was living, and candidly, I know I look white. I got the privileges of being a white person. And so for me, what was so important in building a better country, a better world, was to make sure that we leveled the playing field. If there was a bridge to build, a gap to close, a playing field to be leveled, I worked on it, whether it was health disparities, education, reform, civil rights, voting rights. I worked on them because we needed to build, I thought, a just world. I came back. When I came back, I was the policy director on the Education and Workforce Committee. My husband died suddenly and unexpectedly, and I needed to come home, and I came home to Hyde Park. And so I then wasn't going to work again. I kept hearing the challenges in my community. I had a set of skills that I could not let sit on the sidelines. I brought those set of skills to the workplace again, and now I'd like to bring that set of skills to you. Thank you so much.
You want me to start?
Yes, Yancy, thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Desmon Yancy. I'm a candidate for 5th Ward Alderman and grateful to be here. A little bit about me. My family's at deep roots in South Shore. I live in Boston on the south end of the South Shore. I grew up in the South Shore Valley. Attended Kimball Academy, the great high school here in Hyde Park, and it's really shaped who I am as a person. A little bit about my work background. I spent almost 20 years as a labor and community organizer, really fighting for policies that make it easier for people here in the city. Whether it is fighting for people with disabilities in Springfield, for funding for their programs, or to expand programs for our senior citizens and our children, I've really put my life on the line for this work. And it's because of my lived experience growing up in neighborhoods that have suffered disinvestment has made me really want to stand up and do my part to change all of our lives. After following the death of Kwame McDonald, I co-founded the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability and Empowering Communities for Public Safety Coalitions. For full context, I'm the son of a retired police officer. However, I was pained, like a lot of you, when the murder of Kwame McDonald was publicized and the cover of the following. And it was through that work I was able to create the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability, a new commission here in the city of Chicago to serve our public safety system, and the district councils, which many of you voted on in this most recent election. My work has been centered in the voices of our people, the voices of the community, and through that work we had 36 votes in city council and over 100,000 signatures from people across the city, and over 2 dozen labor and community organizations that were partners in this. And this is because it takes a broad coalition for us to transform our communities. I've led coalitions, created coalitions, and created policy change here in the city. Done that before, and I'll continue to do that as we go on. And look forward to sharing more about my plans and ideas today.
Thank you. And one housekeeping matter, I did not acknowledge my co-moderator, Natasha Dunn. You may hear her ask questions about the forum. Just in a minute, I don't know if she's gonna ask every question, but she's sitting at the table there and she will be assisting me, so don't think that she's part of the audience, just yelling out random questions. Okay, I'm sorry.
What's your name?
I'm Val Free, I'm the executive director of the Neighborhood Network Alliance.
So, in the South Shore community, we have an alliance. So the Neighborhood Network Alliance is headed by Val Free. She's sitting at the table next to Natasha Dunn, and we thank her for her services as well. So we'll get started, because we're all very eager to hear what our next alderperson is going to bring forward to the board. So let's start with a question that no matter where you live in the Fifth Ward is going to affect your residency, and it's going to affect how you live and your quality of life. And that is the Obama Presidential Center, or the OPC, or however people want to, the library, however they want to reference it. But let's talk about the Obama Center. It's going to be key in creating economically viable and sustainable businesses, business districts, generating jobs in the ward. We're all hoping for it to bring about a much needed change. What is your plan to build up the 71st Street Business Corridor to take advantage of the center's economic feasibility and viability? And how do you know your plan is feasible? So it's a two-part question. Your plan to build up 71st Street, and how do you know your plan is feasible? And I'll start with you, Ms. Hall.
Minute and a half, right?
Minute and a half, yes.
So I love the question because so often the question doesn't lead to the positive parts of being OPC. I love 71st Street, and I'm 60 years old, so I remember 71st Street in its heyday. There's several things in terms of working for 71st Street. There's short-term, immediate, and then there's longer term. Short-term and immediate, we need to deal with the blight on 71st Street. We know that when we clean up a school, that achievement goes up in the school. When we clean up a neighborhood, the spirit of the neighborhood will change. I have a plan for dealing with the blight that also helps with giving returning citizens an opportunity to go back to the workplace, and that's creating a core that will work in the overnight hours, cleaning up the streets. There are these cute little street vacuums that look like little elephants that I saw in Europe. Have the streets be cleaned. I've got people on the streets late at night in the witching hour, which is also a deterrent to crime. I've got folks back in the workforce and the streets clean. 71st Street longer term is the granddaddy of transit-oriented development. There's billions of dollars supporting transit-oriented development. We need to put redevelopment in front of that and make sure 71st Street isn't left out. I also think there are economic development opportunities through the federal EDA. I know the head of the federal EDA well. And we should be working the federal appropriations process. One of the experiences that I bring back is my ability to braid funding from state, federal, and local.
Thank you, Mr. Yancy.
I believe in community centered development. I think that what is important about how we redevelop 71st Street, also involves I worked at the old South Shore Bank in the early 90s and have seen the community go down. I think that we have to make sure that the community is involved in that conversation. For example, along 71st Street right now, there are 4 vape shops between Gates and Stony Island. We don't need 4 vape shops. We don't need 4 of anything. And that's because the community hasn't been centered in those conversations. There are a lot of vacant properties, vacant storefronts that can be utilized as job training centers, community organizations, community centers, and also centers for our youth. I believe in an intergenerational space that allows for our young people and our senior citizens to work together to restore our communities. And one of the reasons why I think community centered development works is in my work at Inner City Muslim Action Network in Inglewood, we partnered with Rage and Teamwork Inglewood to redevelop the 63rd Street corridor with a fresh market grocery store, a food pantry. We're reopening a closed school to provide reentry services and mental health services for people right in the community. And since we've been in operation since mid-pandemic around late 2000, there have been 0 incidents of violent crime happening on that corner. We know what it takes to develop our neighborhoods. The problem is that typically people are developing for us and not developing with us in mind, or with us leading it. And it's important for our communities to play a key role in how our communities grow. Thank you.
Thank you. And just segueing directly into this question.
Yeah, follow up. So 71st Street has an SSA, which is a minimum of $500,000. How do you, as an alderman who has aldermanic privileges in some ways, to influence those dollars, how do you see influencing those dollars to expand or enhance, let me say, enhance 71st Street? And have you thought about what that would look like in terms of commissioners, what type of commissioners you would even think about putting on the SSA? Who you want to start with? It doesn't matter. Yancy, and then Holmes.
So when I think about the role of the alderman and all of our public projects and public works, it's important that there's one, transparency, 2, community involvement. And so I would try to make this transparent process possible as we look at allocating that money. There's one caveat about aldermanic prerogative. Aldermanic prerogative was changed when Lori Lightfoot was elected mayor. There may be a change back to that when the next mayor takes office in May. And it's an opportunity for the community, the way I see it, it's an opportunity for the community to play a key role in it, right? When I think about the commissioners, it's important to have folks who have roots in the community, who have done community work, and have an interest in developing our neighborhoods and less of an interest in developing themselves. I don't believe in appointments for folks who want them. It's about making sure that we elevate people who are doing the work in the community so that our communities can thrive. Led by work from people who are already doing the work. It's not about what they're going to do, it's what they have done. And I think that when we do that and establish a system of governance in our ward that is inclusive, that involves everyone, is transparent and communicative with the ward, then we win. And then we're talking about really significant changes in the 71st Street corridor. Thank you.
I agree with Desmond about the process being transparent, and I'm glad he added in the word inclusive. I was actually sitting in a South Shore business for about 2 hours yesterday asking questions about what is it that we need to do to make 71st Street a stronger street and a more vibrant street. I actually believe that there are people who have been tilling the soil on 71st Street for decades. And that 71st Street is now standing sort of at the precipice, and so I get so excited when I think about 71st Street and South Shore. It is just right there, right? And with a little bit of a push and a little bit of some power beneath it, the community will get it there. One of the things that, interesting about the conversation in Inglewood got a federal appropriation this year, South Shore didn't. And so while it's great to talk about, we want to do things at the community level, I absolutely agree with that. But the community cannot do it alone. The community needs somebody and someone who's going to help them get the air cover. It's just like you go into battle. You got infantry and you got the Air Force, and you need both of those things together to win the battle. And so what I feel like South Shore and 71st Street has been missing is the air cover. Like, everybody's tilling the soil, everybody's working as hard as they can, but who's going to get us the funding we need, the support we need, the ability to break through the bureaucracy to actually reach the promised land that South Shore is standing at.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Ms. Holmes, just before you put your mic down, what concrete examples of economic development implemented by your office and your elected alderman can you share with us?
So the concrete work that I did was when I was chief equity officer at YWCA Chicago. And the title Chief Equity.
I'm sorry, maybe I should clarify. If you were elected alderman, what concrete examples can you share with us that you can implement in the board?
Sure. One of the first things I would do is to try to figure out, again, how to break through to the millions and billions of dollars that are available at the federal level that are not coming to South Shore. It's not just about $140,000 neighborhood network opportunity grant, right? That's tactical. We have to be strategic in finding funding streams that will support the 71st Street corridor, as an economic development area. And that would be something that I would focus on very immediately. I, again, have worked with the Economic Development Agency. I almost got the money to build a second story on the YWCA at 63rd and Woodlawn. Had I not left, I would have gotten that money. And so that's the sort of concrete work I want to do. We can't get things done without money. You have all the spirit and love you want, but what the South Shore corridor is missing is the funding to get the visions implemented. And so really chasing after real EDA grants and getting federal appropriations funding is what I would be looking for.
Mr. Yancy?
Right, one of the first things I would do is work to pass the community benefits agreement with the Obama Foundation. I think it's important when we look at economic development that we stabilize homes in our communities, whether it's long-time, single-family homeowners, condo owners, or family-owned multi-unit buildings. It's important that we allow that character of our neighborhood to stay. And if the people stay, the business comes. And so there's for example, a program that's a pilot program running on 69th and Crandon, I believe, supporting condo owners with either grants or low-cost loans to update their property and ease the pain of the increased assessments that are going on with all these older buildings. I think we expand that to make sure that folks can stay in their homes, particularly our seniors who have been in South Shore for a long time. Spurring our economic development, I think that this community-based model is significant, because I'll pivot. The work that we did in Inglewood and Iman, most of that didn't come from federal money, with the exception of our federally qualified health center. The money came from the pressure that the community put on stakeholders in the community and stakeholders in the city to invest in our communities. And so I see it as a bottom up. It is the people fighting for resources to drive the development in their community, and less about people being connected to, or individuals being connected to resources, because it's shared power that grows our communities and not individual power.
Thank you. Is it keeping in mind with this one?
Yes.
Okay.
You've been on the campaign since, what, December? Maybe November? September? And along your campaign, going down the business corridors, what have been your findings and what has been your thoughts about your findings in terms of what the businesses are saying? Because it's nice that the community has a thought, but we have a Chamber of Commerce who should be, should have the ear of the businesses and the ear of the aldermen, just so that we are all aligned with what 71st Street should look like.
So can you give them a question? I'm not sure that they like.
Okay, so the question is, what has been your findings and how do you see yourself playing a role in fixing the gap, filling the gaps with the businesses? Because here's the thing, most of the businesses are not a member of the chamber. Why is that?
So I'm sorry, that's a good question. I want to add to that question. We have a lot of abandoned, maybe businesses that are known that the owners are not actually occupying the space. And so with that being said, what is your plan to engage not only the current businesses that are actually there surviving alone on 71st, but how do you engage those absent landlords and business owners?
So I'm sorry, so we actually have a set of questions just for that topic. So I don't want to lose their train of thought as we talk about the OPC and the funding, but I'm gonna just segue back into that just really quickly. I just want to kind of stay on track before we get off here. So because I hear federal funding and different, before we lose this train of thought. And this is for the residents, because many residents that are here, they're informed and they don't know. So the goal of the Voters Engagement Coalition and their partners is to inform the residents, to inform the people. And so I just have a question about, we talk about funding and resources. I believe we should tap all funding and resources, but let's not skip over our local and what's available to us. And that's what plays into what the co-moderators are saying, and saying that we have chambers and we have different other organizations, but we also have different elected officials. And so there's the county and there's the state. And more closely probably is, then the county commissioners is the state legislators. So we have our reps and our senators. And so how do you envision yourselves as aldermen working with the local electeds and tapping into the resources that are local, and then streamlining that, to get federal money? So I'll let you go first, Mr. Yancy, and then we'll circle back to you.
Sure. So I'll start with, really, there's also city elected officials who we share boundaries with. So one of the ways to think about our work is not just through ward boundaries, but expanding into neighborhoods. South Shore has 3 aldermen, for example. So it's going to be important to have relationships with those aldermen as we go forward. Woodlawn has 3. Hyde Park's got 2. As it stands, we've got relationships been endorsed by Jeanette Taylor, been endorsed by endorsed by Jeanette Taylor, have a relationship with Alderman Mitchell in the 7th Ward. So I think it's an easy relationship to be able to start having these conversations about how we share resources across city funding. I've also been endorsed by State Rep. Curtis Tarver and my state rep, and also State Senator Robert Peters. And so again, these relationships exist already. And so when we think about how we're connecting the dots to bring state funding or bring city funding to neighborhoods, or even with the county, it's important that those relationships exist so that we can have easier conversations around our shared interests to bring resources to the neighborhood.
Thank you. Desmon?
Agree with Desmond about needing to work with everybody on the ground, and that includes also leaders who are not elected. So I have already worked closely with the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. I'm a member of the Hyde Park Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be working with the Woodlawn Chamber of Commerce. It is like a little bit of a Russian doll, you've got the different levels of governments coalesce together. One of the skill sets that I bring to the table is my entire career I've been having to work across the various levels of government. You also have to have the know-how to know what you're asking for. Right, so what the state controls are often, federal block grants that have come to the state, similarly with the county and the city. Understanding what the menu is that you have to pick from is, and how to braid it together. That is actually, again, a known skill set that I have, The other thing that I would say is, although I can't claim the endorsement of everybody in the party establishment, what that means is I bring to you independence, and I bring to you a way to sort of work around people who've had a chance to help you and maybe haven't. And so I'm willing to work with anyone, and I've known to work well with everyone. It's why most of the other candidates on this campaign, remember there were 11 of us, most of them have actually come behind me and endorsed me, and several in this room supporting me. Dee Perkins has actually become my campaign manager. So working with other people to get things done, that's one of my hallmarks. And understanding the complexity and how to navigate it is also a hallmark.
And I'm going to remind the candidates to please remain civil. I too, as the voters can understand when their shots taken. So we'll ask you to please remain civil and please answer the questions that are asked. So I'm going to roll this around and go to my co-moderators because they had the most amazing questions. And here's the question that brings this whole thing full circle. So we have multiple neighborhoods in the 5th Ward, as with many of the wards, in their 50 wards. Specifically on South and West sides, we experience underinvestment or just no investment at all. And so there are usually groups in every one of these different communities: Grand Crossing, South Shore, Hyde Park, that represent different groups and diverse interests. So this has created a divided community. It is well known that we live in a divided ward. And as much as we try to remain unified, that is our goal. We want to be unified with our neighbors in Woodlawn, with our neighbors in Grand Crossing, with our neighbors in South Shore, with our neighbors in Hyde Park. For the candidates, do you have a plan to bring together all of the various community organizations, the block clubs, the SSA, I'm sorry, I drew a blank for it, the SSAs, the Chamber of Commerce, all of them, because they're service providers and the money that they are given, that funding is given to help the residents, not themselves. That funding is to help build 71st or 53rd or 63rd or wherever it is. So we want to know as a community, do you have a plan to bring all of those organizations together and foster an environment of cohesiveness and unity in our ward? And if you do have that plan, how do you plan to implement that or achieve that? And then I want Val, if you will, to add in your question to that so they can get, and I'm gonna give them 2 minutes instead of a minute and a half, just because it's a multi-part question. So remember, the 2 questions are, do you have a plan? How do you achieve that plan? And then Val, tell them your question, because they need to, well, you can tell them now if you wanted to answer it.
I'll wait until.
Okay, all right. So tell me about that, and I'll start with you, Ms. Holmes.
So yes, I have a plan, and I have, again, the experience and track record of having developed things exactly like this. And so my plan is to have an advisory council for the ward. It would be made up of residents in each precinct, but also key stakeholders like SSA, like the Chambers of Commerce, and CAPS representatives and others who are key stakeholders in the ward. I set up similar engagement councils both when I was working for the mayor and as chief engagement officer. We didn't have an African American engagement council. Natasha Dunn knows this, and I created it. She thought I couldn't, and I did. And it had members from every community in the city with substantial African American populations. And so it's not only an idea, I've got the track record of actually having done it. I also sent out a mailer that some of you in the 5th Ward got, because I was aware of this division in our ward, that it is 5 communities in 1 ward. It's like having 5 different kids, and each of them have a unique need, a unique set of concerns, and you have to be able to meet them where they are. You know, it's the opportunity of Hyde Park, the aspirations of South Shore, the resilience of the Pockettown and Grand Crossing, and the tenacity of Woodlawn. How do we bring that all together to create 1 ward where we don't resent each other, where we can help each other, and where those who have know that they have an obligation to the have-nots? When I think about how we're going to develop other parts of the ward, I think there are lessons to be learned from Hyde Park. I want to ask the 2 Eric Williams, because we got 2 of them, like, why did you choose to move the winery to Bronzeville or Virtue to Hyde Park? Why not on 71st Street? You know, what is the secret sauce to Trader Joe for me to figure out how to get a grocery store for Pockettown? Like, there are lessons to be learned from talking to everyone as a ward, and to stop and to bring us together as a family. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this ward is because I know it's complex and diverse, and I can represent all parts of it.
Mr. Yancy?
So with almost 20-year career as a community organizer and coalition builder, this is right in my wheelhouse. I've built coalitions before. As I mentioned, passing the police accountability ordinance, it took us 6 years, but it was coalition partners from every part of the city, north, south, east, and west. I also ran a voter registration drive in 2014 where we registered 50,000 voters with 13 organizations. So again, I'm familiar with bringing people together. I'm committed, should we win this election, to host community meetings in the 4 disparate communities here. Kenwood is west of the metro tracks, not east. But of the 4 communities that exist in the ward, host community meetings through the month of April and May to start introducing myself to folks and also being able to hear those community concerns, because this development is right around the corner. And it's going to be really important that we level set as quickly as possible to build a foundation of community involvement, community engagement as we step into fighting all the things that are plaguing our communities, from public safety, our schools, making sure that we are fighting gentrification and supporting community residents, and also supporting local businesses to make sure that when we think about community-led development, it's businesses that we're actually going to patronize. We don't want to bring businesses to our neighborhood or have businesses come to our neighborhood that aren't supported by our neighborhood, that in 2 or 3 years have exhausted some TIF funds and now leaving on a vacant storefront. We have to make sure that we are bringing the stuff to our neighborhood that we want, and that's only going to happen with the conversations that we have across the board, not just in the different communities, but also bringing folks together on a regular basis. It could be every 6 months or every year, so that we're also addressing war issues, building across these unfortunate boundaries that exist as we think about building our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, so you've been on the campaign since September, and in your findings along the business corridors, and the reason why I keep bringing up the business corridors is because that's one of our weakest links. It is the weakest link in South Shore. However, we do have housing issues, but the weakest link is the business corridors. What was your findings? And what I mean with your findings, what were your top 2, what was the main 2 things you heard over and over and over again? And as you heard those things, what did you think about how, as an alderman, you can fix those things and bring all the parties together, the chamber, the people? You know, how do we bring and make sure we're all in line? Because here's the thing, you have businesses that come into the neighborhood that are not aligned with the people in the neighborhood. So it's I need an answer on how you see that and what did you find?
Me first? Okay, all right, so I've lived near 71st Street for a long time. This most recent trip, like 5 years, so I know what has happened on 71st Street. And in my conversation with business owners on 71st Street, 2 primary issues are: 1, public safety, which is an issue that is existing all across the city. But when you stand on the corner of 71st and Jeffrey, you feel it firsthand. Secondly, it is about making sure we have customers for the businesses that are there. And so starting on the first, my work around public safety has been around making sure that we have a public safety system that works for all of us. So through the Community Commission on Public Safety and Accountability, which I created the ordinance in 2021, it is about making sure that the policing needs in South Shore and Greater Grand Crossing, which are very different than the policing needs in Mount Greenwood and Jefferson Park, are addressed appropriately. If people don't feel safe, they're not going to shop, which brings me to the second part, right? We've got only a handful of retail stores on 71st Street in between Gates and Jefferson County, 27 vacant storefronts. And a lot of those are owned by, someone mentioned, absentee owners. So there are a couple ways we can deal with this, and one involves a carrot and one involves a stick. The carrot is incentivizing those out-of-state business owners who have held this property for a long time in disrepair, incentivize them selling that or transferring it to owners who are going to do right in the community. The other is the stick, which is eminent domain. If necessary, we use the resources of City Hall to seize those properties and then redevelop them according to the needs of the community. So I think it's very simple. All this, again, is centered in the community voice, making sure that we have folks who are saying, this is the kind of business that I want. Because if they say this is what they want, they're likely to patronize it. And when we think about the development that we need, we have to make sure that, particularly on 71st Street, where we got this great level transit crossing, that we make it pedestrian friendly and also friendly for folks on bikes so that people can move around and shop freely.
Thank you.
So in the conversations that I've had with business owners, so safety and blight are sort of hand in hand. That's been the issue. The idea of the street vacuums came from Tanya Trice, who's almost as obsessed with them as I am. She was surprised I had a picture of them on my phone. The other thing that I talked to the brother who owns Majani's, and he talked about creating a destination, right? Because there may not be enough disposable income in the ward today as it's currently populated, but we could make the ward a place where people wanted to come. And so he's a vegan, he wanted a vegan destination, and I thought that was interesting. I mean, one of the reasons why I didn't sign on to the CBA, which I'm getting a lot of criticism for without people understanding the full range of my commitment to most of the elements of the CBA, but there was nothing in the CBA about protecting businesses in South Shore. And there was nothing, and there were parts of the CBA that I think would be concentrating poverty in South Shore. And as long as we're concentrating poverty in South Shore, we're not going to have the kind of disposable income we need for people to be able to support the stores in the business corridors. I also want to talk about, like, I also got criticized about you saying I support gentrification. I do not support gentrification. It was in quote marks in the WTTW report. But what I do support is African Americans being able to live in neighborhoods that are amenity rich and have all the resources they need. The way that if you go on Armitage, right, like it's not just looking at 53rd Street. I kind of laugh about that because 53rd Street is subpar when you compare it to strips on the north side. When I look at Armitage Avenue, which used to be a kind of rough area, early 1990s, people don't remember that. And when you look at what it is now and how it became the place that it is, I want the African American community to be able to live like that too. So it's not gentrifying via displacement and like needing other people to move in. It's gentrification from within.
So we talk a lot about businesses, we talk a lot about saving the world from blight and public safety. But what about the ward youth? Because eventually those are the residents who will lead our ward. And currently, youth programs in certain parts of the ward are under capacity, are underutilized. Do you, as a candidate, have you as a candidate received feedback as to why they're underutilized? And what will you do if you were elected alderman to increase that capacity, but also to level the playing field that so all areas of the ward receive equal resources for youth programs? And we especially need to encourage youth to participate during the summer months when it's warmer outside and crime increases, and they may need, well, not may, but they need activities, something to occupy their time, something that captures their interest. So please tell us if you've received feedback as to why they're underutilized. B, if you're elected alderman, what will you do to increase that capacity and ensure that across the board the resources are equal? And how will you encourage the youth to enroll in these programs during the summer months? So we can start with this.
2 minutes still.
No, 1.5.
First, I want to challenge that the resources be equal. I think the resources need to be heavied up in communities where there's greater need. Equal doesn't mean fair. And so when I look at the children and the youth in Grand Crossing and the youth in South Shore and Woodlawn, they need more of an investment than some of the young people who are lucky enough to be growing up in Hyde Park. And so I don't want to leave that at equal. I actually want more for those parts of the ward. I came to public service on the heels of the Rodney King verdict. A lot of young people don't remember that, but before there was a Laquan McDonald and before there was the tragedy of George Floyd, there was a tragedy of Rodney King. And I was a lawyer in private legal practice making good money, and I quit to become a teacher because I wanted to help bring up the next generation of kids. And I never went back to the private sector after that. I've been fighting for young people and their parents because I also know the best thing I can do for young people is to protect their parents and give their parents the opportunity to take care of them. After the tragic shooting in Millennium Park, I don't know if y'all remember that last summer, I talked to a lot of kids. I went out to my home neighborhood, Roseland, met with Diane Latiger and talked to her kids, not goody two-shoe kids, real kids. We need a place, they want a place to be where they can be safe and just be kids. We have a lot of programs. Kids sometimes aren't looking for programs. They're just looking for a place where they can, the term they use is kickback, that terrified me, but they were looking for a place where they can sort of kick back and be kids again and feel safe. I said, why do you go to Millennium Park? And they said, because it's safe. And so the disengaged youth, we want to give them a safe place to be.
Can you restate the question?
Absolutely. So the current youth programs in the ward are under capacity, in certain parts of the ward are under capacity and are underutilized. We want to know, as you've been out on the campaign trail, what feedback have you received about them being underutilized? You know, why are they? And then if you were elected alderman, what would you do to increase the capacity and the resources across the board to make them equal? And as the summer approaches, what we do to invite the youth and encourage them to enroll in these programs.
So out there, Yesterday I spoke with a woman who lives in Jackson Park who runs the First Tea Golf program at the South Shore Cultural Center. And she talked about the lack of youth involvement in that. I think it's the function of the office to elevate programs that are happening. There's a youth sailing program at the Jackson Park Harbor that is also underutilized. It's using every avenue from social media, traditional media, see if we can earn media to talk about these great programs so that we can bring more children to that program. I talked with a young sister, Ling Young, who lives in Greater Grand Crossing, grew up in Greater Grand Crossing, who was committed to be a part of my youth council. And as we think about what young people need, we have to have young people having this conversation in a safe place where young people can talk about what their needs are, and then connecting that to a multi-generational piece so that we can then do the things we need to do to serve them. It's important that we connect our young people not just to programs, but to people who have been successful or who have failed, and then through that failure, figure out how to do it right so that our kids understand that failure is not the end. It's really just the beginning of your future. I also want to commit to make sure that we have more programs, partnering young people with labor unions, trade unions. So not everybody's ready to go to college, but some of these folks are going to be great plumbers and electricians and eventually small business owners that are growing our communities and living in our communities and raising families in our communities. So it's making sure that we're connecting our young people. When I say young, I'm not stopping at 18. I'm talking about 26-year-olds and sometimes 30-year-olds who haven't had the opportunities that they need to succeed. I want to create that. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. Sure. Desmond, you mentioned using social media and other platforms to share what openings we have, but you didn't mention Park Advisory Council. So what we have a group of Park Advisory Councils, some very active people who are in our communities right now, who are really trying to push to elevate the programs that are in our park districts. We have an array of them. How would you both work with Park Advisory Councils and work with the city in making sure that there's some sort of marketing campaign? And that's one of the top things that I've heard as I used to be on Park Advisory Council, is that the city doesn't necessarily market. So how do we work with the system we currently have and then connect that to the community?
Sure, so the system we currently have is faulty, and you know this, right? I'm sorry to be a point, but you know this. Typically what happens is park programming gets created in McFetcher Street, and then it comes down to the community. So you might have 4 knitting classes at South Shore Cultural Center in the middle of the afternoon when people aren't knitting in the middle of the afternoon. And so our park programming has to come from the people who are actually in the neighborhood who are going to utilize the park. And then through that, connecting with other parks, connecting with schools, making sure that the schools know that these resources are available, community members, community organizations, and trusted leaders in the community, including our chambers. Because if you've got kids in this neighborhood, they should be in our parks. And when we drive past our parks today, our parks are empty. I grew up Stony Island Park in 87th and Jeffrey, and that park was packed full of kids my entire childhood and most of my early 20s. And now you go past the park on a sunny day in June or July, and it's nobody. Right? So we need to reimagine how our parks are being used so that we're able to bring people to our parks with the services and resources and programming that they're actually going to benefit from, that they actually want, and in some cases create. I also think that it's important that we hire from our community. So if we've got someone who does teach a cooking class, they should come from our community and teach that class in our parks. Our sports leaders, right? When we talk about our coaches should come from our community so that we are, again, instilling pride and also instilling values in our young people like we want and like we had in our own lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I've met with and attended several Park Advisory Council meetings, and one of the most interesting was at actually the South Shore Cultural Center, because one of the things that I have a vision for, again, there are lots of programs, but they are programs that are during the day or programs that, again, and I don't mean this in any way naughty, but there are some kids who are already engaged, right? And their parents are already getting them into the programs. Who is at risk are our disengaged youth. Those 100,000 kids that we lost during the pandemic who have not returned back, for example, to CTU. To the public schools, right? And so how do we get those 100,000 kids back and engage, right? And so talking to kids, the reason they're not in the parks is because they don't feel safe in the parks. And this is the tough kids. I sent out a mailer recently. I am as worried about the young African-American male being safe, who is the person most at risk of being shot and killed in this city, right? And so how do we make young African-American men, boys, safe in this city? Right? And so I was thinking about in Hyde Park for Halloween, the kids just sort of walk down the street aimlessly, and some of us go out and like try to, use my 8th grade teacher skills to try to keep them from throwing the eggs. We could have a Halloween party at the South Shore Cultural Center with safety. And again, kids sometimes just want to be kids. They don't always want programming. I had a chance to be a kid. And so many of our young people don't have that chance. I want to create safe spaces for them to do that.
Thank you. So during the primary and the campaign trail for the primary, there were candidates who talked about a need for fully funded public schools and to invest in our teachers. We really need to know how does either of those statements or proclamations help the underserved students, the minority students in the classroom, improve their educational experiences. I mean, the CPS budget for 2023 is roughly about $9.4 billion. The average salary for a CPS teacher, I'm reading here, says $82,000. I don't believe that's true. And I'm only saying that because my mom was a school nurse and my sister is a teacher. So 9 out of 19 CPS schools in the ward are designated as failing schools. So we want to know, what's your plan to work with CPS to improve the standard of these failing schools and to bring them up to par? And you can include in there about fully funded public schools or investments for teachers, but we really need to know, we need a plan as to how to bring these schools back up and how to best service the students that are really the ones we are failing, because we are failing our youth. Yeah. So please, Ms. Holmes, you start.
Can I start the last one? So I support fully funding our public schools. I was a member of the school board in Fairfax County, Virginia, where I was, some may be surprised, supported by both the Fairfax Federation of Teachers and the Fairfax Education Association. And the reason that we had such a good relationship is because what I was very clear about was I would protect teachers, having been one myself and a member of AFT, that had, when it was a battle between the teachers and an administration that thought that there was that your planning time was actually time for you to go watch the cafeteria, or that those days off were actually meaningless, and just had no idea that teaching was about so much more than pedagogy and being in the classroom. And so I was fierce on that, but when it came to protecting, when it was between the teacher and the kid, I always protected the kid, and it is not the same thing. So, but we need fully funded schools so that all of our kids can get a full, fair, and equitable education. What's going to come up, because I'm coming first, is the issue of charter schools. And the CTU talking point that it's because of charter schools that our schools are failing. Only 15% of the schools in this city are charter schools. And those schools are also facing the same sort of loss of resources and loss of student body that the regular public schools are. And by the way, charter schools are also public schools, but they're all losing population because people are leaving.
So I heard, I guess it's a statistic recently that not a single grammar school principal send their kids to Hyde Park High School, right? And so we've got a lot of work to do, and I think it starts with talking with our local educators, particularly those in leadership, to find out what they need in order to be successful in their schools. It starts with the folks that are closest to the problem. That's where the solution starts. And then from there, we're able to figure out how to resource that. And I think that one reason why schools in other neighborhoods are successful, they've got connections to business leaders, community leaders, institutions in the neighborhood that are supporting the success of that school. And we need to amplify that in our neighborhoods, and we do that very, very quickly, because with coming out of the pandemic, our children have lost a lot. I have an 8-year-old son who spent half of kindergarten and all of first grade looking at a computer screen to do his schoolwork. And now he's in 3rd grade and testing, and there are concerns about how he's adapted to that. So we've got kids who have lost quite a bit when it comes to their educational experience. So we need to reimagine what they need in order to be successful. Kids don't learn the way I learned in the 80s. So we need to make sure that we're addressing those needs in a really, really significant way. And also trusting those community groups who are doing off-site learning, who are doing non-traditional schools and community schools, and connecting our children to those so that they get a more fully rounded education than what they're getting today.
According to the Illinois State Board of Education, 85% of 11th graders, African American graders in Chicago public schools are not reading proficiently. In elementary school, Parkside, which is in South Shore, and that's predominantly Black, only 5% of students read proficiently. When we look at the data, we notice that Black students are and have been left behind. What plan do you have to address this? And would you support an effort to create a task force to close the achievement gap?
Yeah, excuse me, I absolutely support a task force. Again, community-led, community-driven, and I think it has to, we can't have a task force that comes up with a finding that sits in the shelf or in somebody's inbox until somebody decides to get the gumption to pay for it. We've got to do the whole thing. We got to walk and chew gum. So as we're figuring out what our needs are, we've got to go out, connect with the business community, the philanthropic community, to find out where these resources are going to come and pay for it. And then, again, hard reset. Let's find out what our kids need and then focus on that. There's some of this that we know because we aren't kids anymore, right? And we're in the neighborhood and we see these kids and what they're going through. If you grab a teenager and talk to them about how they feel about the future, they're absolutely terrified. One, are they going to make it? It's tomorrow promise. And then outside that, with what they're getting, the education that they're getting in schools, does this prepare them for the future? You've got, to your point, 85% of children, these are children who can't read at 11th grade level, right? We have to find out how we can support them. But again, I talked about resources for our children after high school. They're still our kids. And we need to make sure that those who weren't prepared for success today, that we still find ways through community schools, through neighborhood opportunities to provide this additional education so that they can be better prepared for, tech jobs, green jobs, and the future that's ahead of them.
I'm sorry, I've been asked to pause this for just a second. And to get to the next, I apologize.
So I don't get to respond?
You're responding, but I just want to let them know.
Okay.
So, you haven't, I just wanted before they answer. I apologize.
No, I was like, oh, no, I don't respond. So when I was on the Fairfax County School Board, there were 30% of that school system was Black and Latino and poor, and the parents were ignored, and I created an organization called Coalition of Silence because they didn't let those parents didn't have a voice. I also went on to sue our school system because our school, our selective enrollment school, had 8 African American kids in it out of 440. So I have a track record of not putting up with, sort of shenanigans. But when I see that 85% of kids at 11th grade can't read, that means that they went through 11 grades and somebody didn't teach them how to read. When I was an 8th grade teacher and my kids couldn't read, I was in California, I was like, I'm gonna teach you phonics, because they could speak at college level, but they couldn't read, and they couldn't write, and I taught them phonics, it's a decode. Kids had never known that there was a way to decode words. My kids had the highest growth in reading and writing in that school when we had our first standardized exam. And trust me, I had the sweat box, because I was like the first teacher, and the kids looked around and said, dang, this one, they sent you the bad kids, which was true, but I made them great kids. I think it's incredibly important that the CPS budget, again, reflect a heavy up. Pedro Martinez is very concerned about the 51% of the kids who are Latinx, but when you look at his budget, it's sort of equally divided. When there is a problem, you got to invest more. There has got to be a greater investment in the African American achievement gap, and again, particularly Black boys. We are losing our boys starting in school.
Thank you. I'm going to switch gears here, and we're going to move into public safety because it is a burning concern across all 50 wards in the city of Chicago. So the first question is, what is your public safety plan for the ward? how do you envision implementing that plan in the 5th Ward? And then I want to combine that, and I'm going to give them 2 minutes for this. One of the audience asked, what is it that you will do about community gang violence? Because it has become so prevalent in the 5th Ward. So I will start with you, Ms. Holmes. Well, I'm trying to switch up. Who starts when we start?
Yeah, I keep going first. This is the 3rd time.
We started with their questions last, and then I switched to you, so that's fine.
It's all right.
All right.
I'm gonna start with the gang question first, because there's a statute, a state statute that is about child endangerment. And one of the things that's in that statute is that if you are putting kids in danger for criminal activity, that you can go to jail for child endangerment. I keep hearing these people talk about like putting parents in jails for their kids. I'm not putting parents in jail. But the adults in the gangs who are putting 12-year-olds at risk, making them child soldiers, they need to go to jail. So I don't know if you all remember the Adam Toledo case. It was like a 13-year-old Latino boy in Little Village. He was in an alley at 3 o'clock in the morning with a 22-year-old who gave him a gun. When he was turning around to surrender, the police officer shot him, and he had a gun that a 22-year-old had given him. That 22-year-old, nothing happened to him. He should have been prosecuted for child endangerment, if nothing else. And they were all in a gang. Little Adam was in a gang because kids look for a place to belong, right? The adults need to be charged with child endangerment. They need to stop using our kids as child soldiers. So that's the first thing. I forgot the rest of the question because I got all passionate. So could you remind me what the rest of the question was? I apologize. Oh, public safety plan, the bigger plan. 2 parts. So there's the immediate work that we need to do. South Shore, for example, has some of the longest police response times in the city. That can't work. We got to figure out how to change that response time. We've got to deal with the immediate issues of loitering and blight and that sort of thing. But we also have to have a long-term plan. Again, there's some mythology that I don't support treatment, not trauma. I absolutely support it. We have a pilot. It's in 4 neighborhoods. But you also have to understand that many of the mental health servants, what they learned is they're scared to go on some of these calls without the police. And so we have to learn from the pilot and expand to make sure that absolutely we need treatment for the trauma. We need jobs. And I'll stop.
Thank you. Mr. Yancy.
Sure. Most of my plan involves one of the district councils, again, that was created through this work at ECPS, which is this hyper-local opportunity for elected officials and the community to be involved in our public safety conversation. The people, again, closer to the situation, closer to the problem, are the most likely to provide real solutions. We've got community-based violence intervention programs that have been successful all across the city, so we need to scale that up and make sure that there's more funding for them. I also think that we need to make sure that we have job placement programs, these other sorts of resources, because when people are not bored, or people are working and trying to raise a family, they don't really have time and hopefully not be interested in providing the sort of mayhem and crime and violence that's happening in our communities. We can't police our way out of this. Our police budget is roughly 40% of the city budget, is somewhere teetering around $3.5 billion. And what are we doing? What sort of return are we getting for that? So we have to make sure that police resources are passed equitably across the city. And to a point that Tina's made, it's not just equity. It's got to be in a way that is supportive of the problem. And so we have to make sure that right now our communities have more police and more crime. So there's that part of the equation that doesn't work. So it's making sure that the resources that are allocated affect the community. So for example, there's a neighborhood policing initiative, which was piloted about 3 years ago, which takes the Beat Cop program, reimagines it, and has police officers embedded in the community, having conversations with folks, getting to know who has mental health issues. So when Ms. Johnson's son is not on his medication and is in crisis, the police that show up are police that know him, not police who feel this is a tour duty and jump out of a car and do police stuff, right? And then has, another black man involved in our criminal justice system unjustly. Making sure that we resource that. When we talk about our gang program, we've only got 6 seconds left. But again, this gang problem has been across our city for generations, and we need to attack that full force.
I have a question. Speaking of the gang problem, a lot of our schools are elementary schools and stuff, children have to walk through really bad conditions every day. And there's community leaders in South Shore and other areas that are trying to get schools to become safe zones, and they're having issues with it. How would you support the community in creating safe zones around schools to prevent students from being in contact with, open air drug markets, gangs, and all that stuff? How would you work with the police department and the community to enforce the safe zones?
It's me, right? I'll start with, well, being a black man, this is conundrum that we are part of the problem of violence in our community, and also more likely to be victims of violence in our community. So as brothers, we have to step up, whether it's through our safe passage programs, the late great Phil Jackson and Black Star Project used to get black men together all the time to walk and make sure our kids got to school. It's us stepping into those roles to provide safety for our children. There are also these violence interruption programs that are full of formerly incarcerated people who have learned the value of being productive members of society and have rehabilitated, if not through their prison experience, but just through the Lord Almighty, who has shown them that violence is not the way. Bringing poison in our communities is not the way. And so to be able to have those brothers come in and say, this was my life, this was the impact of it, I regret it, and this is what I'm doing now, shows us again that we can fail, we can make mistakes, and those mistakes don't have to be permanent or hopefully not fatal, and give us an opportunity for redemption so our kids can understand that we can go the wrong way, but we always have an opportunity to take one step in the right direction. That one step is really just the beginning. That's modeling that for our young kids so that they can make much better decisions when it comes to their own safety, to how they stand up in our community, to how they protect each other, and then how they serve as role models for the kids that are coming up.
And I agree with leveraging the members of our community who have been formerly incarcerated. You would be surprised to know what a large percentage of formerly incarcerated people live on the South Side. One of the reasons we don't talk about it is because we don't want people to, I want people to be able to serve their time and be able to return to full citizenship and return to full participation in society. I'm on really good terms with an organization called Ex-Cons for Social Change, bringing them out into community and organizations like them to help kids be safe. We also have a safe passage program, although I don't know if there are ways to sort of redesign the safe passage program. That's basically people standing on corners making sure kids are taking those routes. Sometimes kids don't take those routes, right? And so the idea of a safe zone is very, very important, but how we enforce that zone and how we create that zone is going to require partnership on the ground with parents, nosy grandmothers in the window. They used to wear us out when I was a teenager, right? And the police. And folks like Ex-Cons for Social Change or others who have experience in keeping streets safe and are not afraid of the streets.
Thank you. So this is I was just about to ask. Can I ask when you ask? Okay, I'm sorry. And forgive me, but we are facing it's an amazing change that's going to come about in Chicago. Most of the city council is changing over, the mayor is changing over, and our police superintendent is changing over. And this is a simple yes or no question for the candidates. Should the next superintendent of the CPD be an outside hire would you support the next superintendent of CPD being an outside hire? Yes or no? And if not, who do you recommend and why? Well, just say yes or no for that, and then we'll go on to the next one. That's why I said it would be yes or no question. So, superintendent for the city of Chicago, Ms. Holland, should he be outside or inside?
Not going to answer it. I don't think it's a fair question.
And that's fair. You don't have to. Go ahead, Ms. Jeans.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree. It's can I clarify?
Yeah.
Is this the moment to clarify? So the clarification is it's gotta be.
You don't have a minute and a half, but you can clarify.
I'm never going to say, I want the most qualified, and if that most qualified person is coming from another big city and is actually going to live here, I would have fired Brown a long time ago. So, a good urban experience who's committed to actually moving his family and living in this city. I would take somebody from outside, but I would also look for people.
You don't want to answer the question, so I'm going to cut you off.
So
you go ahead.
Yeah, very, very quick. So it's about, when I say most qualified, it's the person who's most interested in enforcing the consent decree and also 21st century community-driven policing. Now, who would I recommend? Recently retired. Is that? I thought you said something.
She took it back, she retracted that one.
So, but neither of you all wanted to answer, so I'm not gonna even ask that question. So when you say something, you have to stand true to these votes. If you don't wanna answer the question,
Oh, I mean, I'll stand true. I thought we made the point that it has to be
one
something.
leads into the other. So, go
Okay.
ahead, moderator.
My question is public safety. In South Shore, the NNA is the Community Engagement Organization. We organize block by block. We also establish organizations under that block by block. My question to you all is, would you come in to support what we're doing as a block by block? Because what we find is that most elected officials see block by block a little intimidating, and it should be partnership. Would you support it?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, community is the focus. Having spent 17 years as a community member fighting against elected officials, I know exactly why they're concerned about it. It's because it's shifting the power away from them and bringing it back into balance so that community members can have more say-so in what goes on in their neighborhoods, and less of a absent elected official or an elected official who's less responsive to the needs of the community and more responsive to the needs of some. So I'm a firm believer in the work that the NNA has done, building block by block, engaging residents about economic development and public safety and other issues, housing, et cetera. So I'm a firm believer that the voice of the people should prevail in these conversations, and we'll work to elevate that, expand that, and support block club organizing across the board.
Thank you.
And you made clear, to me that what you do is not block clubs,
Exactly.
but the idea of block by block engagement is incredibly important. I also think it's important because we actually know the data shows that, and I know you're not a block club, but the data shows that active block clubs, that those blocks have lower crime rates. And so it is the grandmothers looking out of those windows, and remember the people were coming to Inglewood and acted crazy, and the men came out on the porch and said, no, you're not gonna bring that stuff up in here. So that is what you have when you have an engaged block and an engaged community, which is, I think, what your organization does is bring blocks together and they build a community, which is amazing. The other reason why I'm excited about block by block work, and again, when I was chief engagement officer, I tried to do a citywide block club summit to try to bring these ideas together, and your idea and your approach would have been part of that, but I couldn't get the funding to do it. But the other thing that's important about block clubs is, you know, there's like crowdsourcing for money. Like, one of the things I like doing is crowdsourcing for ideas. And I could see a summit where block clubs are together and we're crowdsourcing for ideas. All the other things that we've talked about, I want to crowdsource ideas because none of us have all the answers. What we have to be is open and receptive to wanting to hear ideas from the people that we serve, not that serve us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, I'm sorry. So I have a couple of people, residents in the audience that.
Can we take a 2-minute break since that's okay, just a 1-minute break? Okay, 1-minute break because I gotta pay my parking meter. Just 1 minute?
It's gonna take a little bit more than 1 minute. So we'll take.
How did I get up there? Right over there.
About 5 minutes. We are addressing all audience questions that we can get to in our limited time that we have left. This is all about the audience. If you have questions, please fill out and complete your cards and pass them forward. We are now going into just strictly questions from the audience. There will be, and I'm gonna try to do my best to get through all of them, but if there are some left over, I will pass them over to the Voters Engagement Coalition organization. They can make copies of them, pass them to the candidates, and they can address them how they please. So, Madam Timekeeper, there are gonna be some questions, I'll give a minute, some will be 30 seconds, we're gonna do kind of a speed round, we're gonna try to get through the questions. But I'll try to allow, there may be one or two that I do 1.5 minutes, so. All right, so, and there's a couple of audience members, and I'm sure more than a couple, that are interested in knowing, if you are elected by the voters, will your office have a weekday and time where residents can come in and talk directly to you and not to your staff? Ms. Hall.
Yes, I'm stealing that idea from Alderwoman Taylor. She has office hours on Thursdays, and I'm gonna have open office hours one day a week. I don't know if it's gonna be Thursdays, but absolutely, I want you all to be able to come in and see me without an appointment.
Thank you. Mr. Yancy.
Yeah, without question, I think it's important for residents to have access to their elected officials, and we'll actually have a regular day during the week for voters and residents to come in and discuss their concerns.
Thank you. Okay. What could you do to, okay, this is a two-part question, so we'll need a full minute for this one. They want to know about affordable housing and how will you address affordable housing in the ward, and what efforts would you implement to move more Black businesses into the ward? I'll start with you, Mr. Yancy.
Sure, affordable housing is important. The Fifth Ward is probably more affordable housing than any other Black neighborhood, and on the south side especially. And so I think it's the quality of the housing that's important. So when we look at a lot of these apartments who are, people can afford to rent, they're, in some level of disrepair. I make a joke about my home place where I've got layers and layers of paint and wallpaper that if we took that down, I have 10 extra square feet in my place. We gotta fix that kind of stuff, right? Make sure we're bringing people's apartments into what they need today. And in terms of, what's the quick question about that? Can I pick up business?
Supporting Black businesses and bringing more Black
Oh,
businesses.
support Black businesses without question. My first job was for a Black business at 1615 East 55th Street. It was a video store owner who hired a Black kid walking down the street, went to Kenwood, and what he instilled in me was far more than I would have gotten in a lot of other places. And what's important about that is our big box stores like Target, they're not hiring from our neighborhood, they're hiring from other neighborhoods, and those folks coming in to work. And we think about the opportunities that our children need. It's important that people who are business leaders in our community are pouring into those young people.
Thank you. Ms. Hall?
So I'm glad that we're acknowledging there's a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing in South Shore, and I want to preserve that affordable housing. But my dream is to get those tenants into home ownership. I think that the best way to get free of like a landlord who may not be your favorite person is to own your own home. And so I really want to look for ways to transform tenants into owners. And when you become owners, it changes your stake in the community. I also think it's important to make sure that people have disposable income to support these businesses. And so we have to make sure that the ecosystem, I talk about the economic ecosystem, the reason Hyde Park works is because it's got a balanced economic ecosystem. We got to balance the economic ecosystem, frankly, in every community, in the Black community, so that we can be back like a vibrant 63rd Street, a vibrant 71st Street, a vibrant 112th in Michigan, where I grew up, right? It's creating a balanced economic ecosystem that is affordable housing, more homeowners, and more disposable income in the community.
Thank you. And Ms. Hall, you can start with this one. What are your thoughts, if any, about keeping the middle class community in the community?
Oh, this is an obsession of mine. I think that I feel like sometimes that conversation doesn't happen. I talked to a woman who lived in Woodlawn. Her family has owned a 3-flat in Woodlawn probably for, almost a century, right? And I talked to her about making sure she could stay because she lived through the fire, right? She lived through the hard times in Woodlawn, and now if Woodlawn's gonna be different, I want her to have the right to stay and enjoy it. But that means we have to have really strong tax abatement policies. Because as property values go up in Woodlawn and they'll go up in South Shore, taxes are going to go up. We have to make sure no one is displaced because of their taxes. I don't want anyone to lose their home because of taxes. And it has to be not just for the owner, but for the people who live in the home, because what happens is grandpa dies, and then the heirs lose the house, and we have to protect against that. We saw that happen in Washington, D.C. We can't have that happen here.
Mr. Yancy?
Yeah, I believe in a strong middle class. Today's middle class is very different than the one that I grew up in. There are far more rich people and far more poor people. Middle class is treated like a middle child and doesn't get a lot of attention. And as we shrink, it's important that we protect that through home ownership, through making sure that folks have good jobs, that we protect pensions and make sure that people who have gone to work and earn a pension have their pensions protected and saved. And I think more specifically about, when I think about South Shore and Hyde Park, this aging home stock and the aging homeowners, and making sure that we're able to protect them to be able to stay in their homes and provide, safe environments and safe neighborhoods.
Thank you. Okay, so this question is about 71st Street west of Stony Island. There is not a store in walking distance. They have to come to Stony or come east to get to a store. If you were elected alderman, how would you, or what are your plans to implement and build a store, provide a store for the residents west of Stony Island, at least on 71st Street? It's all you, sir.
So talking about a stepchild, it's Pocket Town, right? Like, everybody forgets that Pocket Town and Greater Grand Crossing is part of this ward. And even when we talk about 71st Street, it's sort of like east of Stony Island. I think there's that dollar store that's west of Stony Island. That's where you make a U-turn, right? That's how everybody knows what it is. I want to work not just with the people in that neighborhood, but like most of Grand Crossing is represented by a different member of aldermen. And I want to make sure that we're working in partnership to figure out how to create a vibrant business corridor for Grand Crossing. There clearly are little shops that could be there. There are opportunities. My friend Robert Palmer is here. I'm also friends with Marlene Fisher, who also ran. We're going to work together to figure out how to help Pocket Town and get it everything it needs.
Thank you. Mr. Yancy, go ahead.
Yeah, that Dollar General has been closed for almost 6 months. And so we need to make sure that we put something there that our community needs. And having worked in Inglewood and seen the whole Foods save a lot of conversation, right? We don't want to do that in our ward. We want to make sure that what we bring is a store that represents the values of the consumers here in the ward. That's what we are. We're going to be patronizing the store. It should be something that we want. I remember, I lived at 67 in St. Lawrence for about 3 years. I remember Rio Movers was a staple in Greater Grand Crossing. Right, that's gone. We're losing so much, but the residents that I've talked to in Greater Grand Crossing have had these unrealized concerns about how we get a grocery store, how we have an economic district along South Chicago and along 71st Street that supports their needs. The previous alderwoman hasn't addressed those concerns, as elected as alderman now.
Thank you both. Okay, Mr. Yancy, you can start with this one. I'm gonna just go back and forth with you all starting. So, what are your plans to address and possibly rehab some of the abandoned properties? So you can talk about residential as well as commercial.
I think the plans involve making sure that residents of the community have first opportunity to be able to rehabilitate those properties. Again, we want to grow our neighborhood. We want to grow our neighborhood with people who have added to the richness of our communities, have seen the disinvestment, stuck around long enough to hold on, and now we're on the verge of some real great development. I also think about multi-unit buildings that are owned by families. There are additional properties on those blocks. I would like to see people who live on the block to be able to have access and opportunities through low-cost funding options, grants, and other resources that allow them to rehabilitate not just residential properties, but our commercial properties as well. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of owners along 71st Street who don't live in the neighborhood, who have allowed these communities, these storefronts to, look like flags in our neighborhood for a long time. It's either eminent domain or sell it to somebody who's going to do something with it. Those are the ones who are. Thank you.
Thank you. This one.
Yeah, no, the abandoned properties or the properties that are owned by outsiders who don't even know they own them because they're in real estate investment trusts in many cases, right? So I agree with Desmond that, like, you know, I'll try carrot, but I might get to the stick sooner than you would, because there's this one piece of property, it's actually on 67th Street. We're talking a lot about 71st, it's on 67th. Beautiful piece of property. Clearly somebody bought it, boarded it up, thinking there's gonna be a PGA golf course. I think about the housing that's been taken out of the community because of that, and the blight. You know, that's a big, dark box now, taking up almost a whole city block. That needs to be put back in service. I think about creating, because, you know, my pathway to home ownership is my obsession, right? Like, how do I turn that into a co-op that people in the community that are renters who can buy? How do I take some of the remaining ARPA money, because there's a bunch of money we got during the pandemic that's not used. How do we do that? And similarly doing the same thing with the businesses on 71st Street and elsewhere in the ward. We have got to get them active and vibrant, even if they are not that profitable. Get them active.
Thank you. And just, this question actually talks about eminent domain. It asks about eminent domain and as far as the city council process. Does it also mean paying the owners their fair market value and receiving city council approval? And it's a two-part question, so you can give them about a minute and a half for this. What are your plans to work with the current Cook County assessor, Mr. Katie, who is a local, grew up in, well, attended school, he's not necessarily Fifth Ward, I'm not sure, but it's still a local, to working to address the vacancies on these corridors. So the question is, as it pertains to the city council process, does that mean paying the owners the fair market value and receiving city council approval in order to get them in the domain? And then how will you work with the assessor to address the vacancies?
So, I'm a lawyer. Eminent domain, in order to execute it, you do have to pay fair market value, but there are sometimes some tricks on that. And so if it's your house, I would want to make sure it's not used in a predatory way, because I have also seen entire communities sort of condemned via eminent domain because the county thought, and this is actually in Virginia, the county thought, well, we could get more in taxes because we could put a bunch of townhouses there. They condemned an entire neighborhood and told people what their houses were worth, so it's terrifying what can be done. But there has to be an insistence on fair market value, and that fair market value, I would say we would need to, if I were someone that this happened to, I'd be insisting on like sort of 3 different independent appraisals. But yeah, you don't just take it, you give them some money, but that can also be a problem. I think that like there are, that we could work with Chris Cady and others to figure out how we can even do some type of tax disincentive, if you will, on these vacant properties. Because one of the things is the vacant properties are very cheap to hold right now because of the taxes. So you want to hold a property vacant, we're going to charge you more taxes so that it's not so comfortable for you to just sit on it. And I think that's one way to put some pressure on these absentee loaners to, like, you know, fish or cut bait is another way to say that, but I won't do that. You know, like either do something with this or give it back to the community so we can make it an asset in the community.
Thank you.
Yes, so Tina already talked about the process. I think what is more concerning is fair market value. Because when we talk about the Black community, it ain't ever fair. So we have to make sure. You did, right, but so we have to make sure that fair means right and just and not something on paper. When we talk about, what was the second part of the question?
Just about working with Chris Cady.
Working with Chris Cady. You mentioned Chris Cady, that's his brother. Fritz is my high school classmate from Kenwood. And Chris was one of the first people who endorsed my campaign. I spent some time on his transition team when he was elected the first time. And so we have a relationship. I understand the challenges that exist when it comes to keeping homeowners in their home. So I think that, again, there's a two-way street of discussion that I get to take the community voice into these conversations and bring Fritz to the community as we talk about the sorts of relief that homeowners need in order to stay in their home.
Thank you. Okay, someone asked about holding monthly meetings, but you already addressed that. Will you use social media to keep us all informed? 1 minute. 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Exactly. Yes, someone young in my office will keep them informed on social media, because I know that's an incredible and effective way. But if we didn't talk about monthly meetings, we talked about office hours and advisory councils. I do think we need a regular monthly ward meeting where people know that on the second Tuesday of every month or whatever it's gonna be, there's gonna be a ward meeting, and I'd like to rotate it through the ward so that one day it might be in Grand Crossing, another time in Woodlawn, another time in South Shore, that it's rotated, and we will use social media to help advise people of that, but we'll also be calling people, because a lot of the older people don't use social media. So we gotta make sure everybody knows that these events are happening and do it like clockwork so people can depend on it.
I guess I agree with all that, right? We want to make sure we have a very active social media presence. We want to make sure that we have, this conduit of information that goes back and forth, because it's not just monthly meetings. The majority of the voters in this ward are over 50. I think about 80% are over 50, and about 80% of those are over 60 who aren't on Facebook like that, right? They aren't on Twitter. So we have to make sure it's something they can get in their hand, whether it is, a copy of the Hyde Park Herald or a newsletter that comes out on a regular basis that keeps them updated on what's happening. And then again, having someone making sure that there's this constant communication, this flow of information, because we're only going to be as valuable as a community as we can be if we're talking amongst each other.
Thank you so much. If you become alderman, how sure can we be able to hold you to get grants from government without penalties? I think that's what it's without any penalties. So I guess
Grant
they
money
want to know.
instead of, sounds like they're looking for grant money rather than.
Yeah, I think they're looking for grant money, but, so what I believe is being asked is about resources through obtaining grants. And it would come via the city, so, the city has offered a plethora of grants for small businesses during the pandemic. So how would you all be able to, as aldermen or alder people, be able to obtain and inform the residents on how to obtain these grants without penalties? You can start with something.
So I think that one of the things is that there's all kinds of money and people don't know where it is, right? And so I think that we need to, if I'm alderman, I'm going to have a regular sort of place where you can look to see where the grant opportunities are. But the other thing is, and I worked on this again when I worked on the city, we have to make sure the small community-based organizations have the capacity to get these grants, which is the easy part. That's how having somebody help you navigate how to write them, but then also how to manage the grants. Because these grants are often always, you get reimbursed. So you gotta have upfront money, right? And then know how to go get your money. And it is not easy. And so we wanna figure out, I wanna figure out how there's to be a navigator in my office to help with readiness so that small community-based organizations that are doing some of the most important work on the ground have access to this grant, know how to get to it, know how to apply, and know how to, it's called vouchering, know how to voucher to get your money.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a problem with the funding system now that makes small community organizations have to put up money in order to get it back. I do know that at least in the Department of Human Services, when I was at Inner City Muslim Action Network, they had a program that worked the opposite of that, where they gave us money to do rental assistance in the 60621 zip code, right? It's making sure that there's access to that information, and also not just access to that information, support, because a lot of these smaller nonprofits don't have the back end to be able to support the reporting, to be able to understand how to correctly allocate the finances that come with it. And I would also recommend strongly that folks get in coalition with each other, because the current model of funding nonprofits is not individual one-off organizations, but they want to see what you can do together. So again, I'm not the only person up here talking about people coming together to make change in their community. The people who are funding these programs, the people who are making sure that under-resourced nonprofits have the money to be able to impact their community, they're saying, y'all get together with other organizations and then you can do this work at scale. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick 30-second question. It says you have both expressed support for ranked choice voting. As alder people, would you push to implement ranked choice voting in Chicago?
Yes.
I think this is alluding to the next municipal election in 2027, so.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'll push for it, but also we've got to do the education on the front end, because I don't think most voters understand what ranked choice voting is and why it's better.
Thank you. As alderperson, way for the city and not just for the Fifth Ward? What citywide issues are you most concerned with besides public safety? Great question. Ms. Holmes.
So, some of the education I learned around the CBA, were provisions that need to be citywide. So the right to return. If something happens in your apartment building and the landlord says you have to move so that you can fix the boiler, for example, and then when it's time to come back, you're told, well, you can't come back. We can't have those kinds of shenanigans, because, you know, I joke, but it's probably not true, not a joke. People run around and like break boilers to get people out. So you have to have the right to return, and I don't think that's just for South Shore. I think that's citywide. I think we don't have to keep having these CBAs for every neighborhood. We need to look for citywide system change. I want city council to be a true co-governor of the city. I want us to appoint our committees and appoint our chairs. I want a city charter. I want us to be true fiduciaries of the co-governance of the city. When you're elected mayor, it shouldn't make you king or queen. You should be a partner with city council, because with small wards, the advantage of those small wards is that we know our wards, and we need to be co-partners in a very real way. And budget, of course, is one of the most important places where we should co-partner and be fiduciaries.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would work really hard to fight homelessness. It's a big issue in Chicago. You've got tens of thousands of Chicago public school students who self-report as homeless, but then if you and your mother stay with her cousin, you're homeless too, right? Sleeping on couches, you're homeless too. And so it's making sure that we're addressing this issue in a full way with the ordinance for Chicago Home, which takes properties over $1 million, apply this very small tax to that to fund mental health resources, to fund housing programs, to support homelessness, to support programs to support youth. And again, mental health, because one of the things, you know, if you've lived in the Fifth Ward, you know, particularly on the Hyde Park, 71st Street as well, that there is a very active homeless population here in one of the greatest wards in the city. And it's going to be incumbent upon us to resource this problem. Again, with housing advocates like the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless and Chicago Housing Initiative, to make sure that we are fighting this issue all across the board, which this touches the first issue, which is public safety.
Thank you. Okay, so your menu money is just not enough. It's inadequate to meet the needs of every portion of the board. What criteria will you use to prioritize where you spend the money? And if you can give some detail to exactly what projects and what areas will be your focus and why, we can start.
Sure.
1 minute still?
Yes, please.
Yeah, a robust, transparent community engagement process is how we'll figure out how to spend that money. It's not me sitting in my little, you know, block of 67 flag determining what happens all across the board. There are people who have need, and in some cases have need for a while. There's just an example, and this isn't so much effective on menu money, but here's the story. So, apartment building right at the corner of 55th and Lake Park, where a lot of seniors live, has had crumbling sidewalk for years. They've talked to their property manager, they've talked to the current owner, they've talked to a lot of folks, and for whatever reason, that hasn't been prioritized. So it's making sure that as a community, as a ward, that we're talking about how to best allocate this money and use it in the ways that bring residents to the ward, build value in the ward, and remove blight from the ward.
Thank you.
So there's a formal process called participatory budgeting, which I have already pledged publicly to support for menu money. Participatory budgeting, it's actually a process that UIC has helped develop. And I worked with UIC when I worked in the mayor's office to try to bring participatory budgeting, or at least elements to it, to the whole big city budget. We were so successful that some of the most progressive members of city council on the floor of city council said this is the most participatory budgeting process that we've ever had in this city, and I count that as one of my great career achievements. So there's actually a formal process. We will take the steps where sort of the community is trained in how you understand the budget, what are the issues that you can actually like buy with menu money. I'm obsessed with streetlights, because you know, like we have all these trees in our ward, which I love, but they block the lights from getting to the sidewalks. I want those little sidewalk lights that they have on the north side, but apparently you gotta use menu money to get that. So I full on participatory budgeting for our ward money. And I think that'll be incredibly inclusive for all of us.
Thank you. right along to closing statements. So in your closing statement, we're gonna allow 2.5 minutes for closing statements. In your closing statement, please include your favorite image or impression of the Fifth Ward, and what would you want to share with the rest of the city of Chicago about the Fifth Ward? And I'll let you start.
My favorite image of the Fifth Ward is actually the diversity of the Fifth Ward. And so the places where we see all parts of the Fifth Ward coming together. There are not a lot of places in the city of Chicago that are as diverse, both racially, ethnically, but also socioeconomically as the Fifth Ward. And so those moments when we all come together, that's my favorite image of the Fifth Ward. And that's also what I would want people to understand about the Fifth Ward. We are complex, we are diverse, but we also are getting things done. We are a vibrant community. I want us to work to understand one another. One of the reasons I was so excited to run for Fifth Ward Alderman, and I'll say this, I probably wouldn't have run for Alderman in another ward, right? But I feel like that I am the Fifth Ward in many ways. I am its complexity. I am its resilience. I am its a sense of like opportunity. I want to represent everyone in this ward because I have lived all of your experiences. You know, I grew up in a house with a single mother. My mother's African American. I remember her trying to get me to the school bus so that I could like get to school and then run it off to work. I remember us getting evicted from an apartment on 5419 Dorchester because she was Black. In 1967, there was no protection for my mother. And that's how we ended up in Chatham, and she ended up getting married, and we ended up in Roseland. The struggles of Roseland remind me of the struggles of Grand Crossing. People who bought their houses, did everything right, what they were supposed to do, but had no amenities and had no opportunities. I also know the opportunities of this ward. The University of Chicago gave me opportunity to play in the big leagues. You know, it gave me the confidence, it gave me the education, it gave me the skills so that like when it was time to fight for you and fight for people who were disenfranchised and poor, I had the skill set to do that. And so I am so excited to be a member of the Fifth Ward. There's not a lot of difference between Desmon and I and our values. But what there's a difference is like our experiences and our capabilities because of those experiences. You know, I did community organizing. I've also been an advocate, but I have also governed, and governing is different. It is about balancing competing legitimate interests. It's about keeping your eye on the true north when 5,000 people are trying to make you look south. And I have the experience to do that, and that is going to be, I think, the ultimate decision in this. Similar values, very different experience.
Yes.
Yeah, my favorite thing about the Fifth Ward is the lakefront that covers the entire Fifth Ward, from 71st Street to 47th Street. And partial to the South Shore Cultural Center at the Point. As a Kenwood student, I spent a lot of time at the Point, still do today. And as a photographer, those are my two favorite places to take clients because it's just such a beautiful, beautiful space any time of the year. And I like sharing that with folks. We also get the fireworks, you don't have to go downtown to watch them at the South Shore Cultural Center. Don't tell nobody else. So here's why I'm here. Longtime resident of South Shore, and you know, I used to catch the Jeffrey 6 when I lived in 87th and Jeffrey to Kenwood, which took me through the war, right? All South Shore, a little bit of Woodlawn, and then Hyde Park. And watching that since 1985, watching it grow and prosper and then wither and die is the reason why I'm running. Spending nearly 20 years as a community organizer with the lived experience of sleeping on somebody's couch for weeks at a time because I was in between blessings. I've been underemployed and unemployed. And it's that work that led me to organize against those systems because it's our government that has failed us. Right? There are people who are elected to office who refuse to pass provisions protecting civil rights of Black folks. Right? If it wasn't community organizers, we wouldn't have women's rights or marriage equality or police accountability here in Chicago, if we're going to be completely honest. The work that we did crafting the Community Commission on Public Safety and Accountability is the singular most important police accountability ordinance to come out of the death of George Floyd, right? And so when I know that the community's voice is important and how we craft policies, that the community voice is important and how we leverage our power so that we can win despite our government in a lot of cases working against us. And if you're a Black or Latinx or woman, you have felt the brunt of that. And so this is the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims. And so I want to just leave you with a quote. Brother Malcolm X said that when I becomes weak, illness becomes wellness. Our communities are in pain because people have been thinking about themselves. But if we come together and stand together, we can right those wrongs, revitalize our communities, and then win transformation that we deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this concludes our forum. I want to say, City of Chicago, stand up, because the whole world is watching us.
Yep.
I want to say amazing timekeeper. Everybody give her a round of applause. I want to thank Val Reed for making this Natasha Dunn, who does amazing work across the board. I want to thank both of the candidates. Congratulations to you both in advance for just running a good race and for coming out and facing the voters and giving us your truth. And thank you for your service. I want to thank the Voters Engagement Coalition for putting this together for us. I want to thank all the children that's happening here. The Mechanism of Grace from Operation Neighborhood Safety, Sam Biggin is here now. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for partnering with us. Thank you all so much. And each and every one of you, I just want to say, please, April 4th or before, early voting is open. Go out, vote, take someone with you if you can. Get a senior, make sure they get there. Teach a youth how to go in and practice being civically engaged. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Attorney Tiffany Brooks. I was your moderator for today. And I ask you all, please be safe, and most of all, please be kind to yourselves and to others. Thank you all.
We want to thank